Hey folks, welcome back to DarkHorse Podcast Livestream A&Q section extravaganza number 49.
We're starting with the answers this time.
We are starting with the answers.
Let's do it, Jeopardy style.
Inspired by Jeopardy.
All right. Okay. Obviously, we should start with 42.
Yes.
And your turn.
Well played.
Mm-hmm. Nothing? You got nothing for me.
I got 0. It was a bluff.
Yeah, I guess. Okay. We will start with a few questions from episode 48, and then a question from the Discord, and then move into your questions from last hour before moving into questions from this hour. First question from a week ago. Can you think of a reason for the seemingly universal nature of pilgrimages across time and cultures?
Sure.
Yep.
Yeah, I mean, I can think of a lot of them. There's one in particular I've spent a good deal of time thinking about. You and I both have. The pilgrimage of the Huichol people in search of peyote. They cross Mexico to collect peyote once a year. And in that case, I would argue that the population has likely moved over this distance, and so a pilgrimage that causes you to return to some ancestral landscape regularly, keeps you in contact with the information about what the intervening space looks like.
That is to say, it provides a regularly updated map that is not just held by a select few.
Right. And so that has a great deal of potential importance, just ecologically speaking, maintaining that kind of information. In the case of the Huichol and the peyote, obviously the peyote is playing a tremendous cultural role, and so there's a necessity to move to another part of the world in order to do one's daily ecological stuff, but to maintain contact with the peyote cactus would make sense. But anyway, I guess the point would be there are a couple of reasons, a couple of styles of reasons. One, it could be that a journey that causes you to return over some landscape informs you about something that is ecologically important to know. It could be that pilgrimages cause you to basically touch base with something cultural from which too much divergence is a danger. And so that there's a synchronizing aspect that to the extent that you keep returning to some location or return to some location at one point and know that you will at some point in your life, keeps you from dispensing with all of the architecture that goes along with whatever that cultural tradition has. So I would say it is a kind of spatial conservatism that has probably preserved populations against too much change.
Great. Yep. I think that's spot on, and to which I would just add that what I already said, the universal value of having an accurate and regularly updating map of the area around you, perhaps just the area that historically your people have lived in, or perhaps it's a area of a watershed, some area presumably that will change over time, as all do, some more rapidly than others, that would allow you to understand what an escape plan might look like, what a new kind of move might look like, and that is not static.
Yep.
In terms of a map that was drawn 50 years ago, and who knows what's happened since.
Yeah, and I guess I would add one more thing. This came up in my conversation with Christine Brophy and Scott Barry Kaufman on Unity Campfire this week. But there is this sense amongst moderns that you are effectively entitled not to suffer, not to struggle. Mm-hmm. And that therefore suffering and struggle is taken to be some kind of an indication of a failure of something. And this is utter nonsense, right? Struggle and suffering are inherent to accomplishment. And so I have a few rituals that I think of as toughening myself up, things that I know I find unpleasant. And I do them, and my sense is this is necessary for me to be able to face things that I don't necessarily see coming. So you can imagine that a population choosing a regular struggle would keep people in that frame of mind. And actually, also fasting could certainly work this way, that that a regular, like an annual fast would cause you to keep in touch with what it's like to be hungry and to know that it's not the end of the world.
Absolutely. And no coincidence, I think, that some form of pilgrimage and some form of fast exist in many religions.
Yes, exactly.
Adults born preterm have a preterm behavioral phenotype, resulting in timidness and neuroticism. How does being born preterm impact other animals? So the first answer to that is I don't know, and I'm not sure that we know, because I'm not sure that preterm is reliably enough a thing anywhere else that it's been looked at.
Yeah, I would say in nature, in general, preterm is going to mean not viable.
Right. And so you never get to discovering what the behavioral phenotype might look like.
Right. On the other hand, runts are a feature of litters, and it's not preterm, but it has some of those characteristics. And I would say the runt is going to have neuroticism or something like neuroticism and insecurity, because basically it is an evolutionary attempt in a, you can imagine if a pregnancy starts and then the year turns out spectacular, then having produced an extra that is denied resources in utero but can be brought to full size is an evolutionary win. And so that individual should expect that, to the extent that it's not a good year, that they're actually most likely to perish and maybe to be abandoned by the parent. And so you would imagine that neuroticism and demonstrating strength and all of these things that might increase the chances of surviving to adulthood would be features of that personality type.
Yeah, I'm not sure. Demonstrating strength, it seems to me, would be a feature, and yet it's not. I don't know. I've never heard this preterm behavioral phenotype term before, but timidness and neuroticism strike me as not in line with demonstrating strength. But we do see that in runts of litters, and of course, humans don't bear litters. The vast majority of human births are singletons, with twins being a very small percentage, and really more than that being almost entirely a manifestation of modern technology.
Right. Yeah. Okay.
Please discuss voting as a right and responsibility. Vote your conscience. What effect does not voting have? Vote shaming topic is this next sentence. I'm not sure exactly what that means. Love you guys. But I like the general topic here. Is it both a right and responsibility?
Well, I want to be a little careful, because I think there is a way in which it is a responsibility, and I wish people took it as one, but I don't necessarily think a uninformed vote is such a great thing. So to the extent that voting is your responsibility, you should figure out what you should actually be voting for. On the other hand,
so that if I may, it's not that voting is the entirety of the responsibility. If you're going to vote, it should be an informed vote. Informed voting should be the responsibility that you understand yourself to have, not merely voting.
Yes, but I want to put a giant asterisk on that, because
I thought that was the asterisk.
I want to put an asterisk on the asterisk.
Yeah, that does sound like you.
Yeah, it does. But the thing that we all face in our voter pamphlets is almost impenetrable. And you can't be informed. And who are these judges? And, so the point is, to the extent that there is this temptation to finger wag at people and say, oh, those uninformed voters, the point is, well, we set them up for failure. We set ourselves up for failure. And so ideally what you want is a system that gives you the ability to vote on that which you have the ability to be informed about, and delegates where it needs to delegate to people who can handle the responsibility. And of course, what we have is a giant, corrupt entity that stands in place of all this, and it loves to hand us confusing garbage and manipulate us into feeling emotional about it and all the things that it does. But ideally, yes, you would want people to take, voting as a privilege and a responsibility, and to treat it very seriously. Now, one thing I would say is there's a longer discussion for another time about the fact that if you take all of the people who don't vote and you separate them into two groups, there are people who don't care. They're apathetic. They're not paying attention. They don't see themselves as having a stake.
Yep.
And then you take You separate them from the people who are frustrated and angry that they never have something that they feel good about voting for.
Yep.
Right? That second group is very large. And if you compile them with all of the people who do vote for one of the major party candidates, there are enough votes in that group to transform civilization. And the fact that we are told, well, first of all, we're fine with you not voting. Basically, we're going to give you an awful situation and drive you out, and people are going to feel good about not voting because they know that voting is stupid, which in some sense it has become. That this causes a collective failure of imagination that is the difference between us succeeding or continuing to fail in the same way. So at some level, we have to rescue the idea of protest vote from the concept that it is a pointless waste of your power, because in fact, there's a ton of power in voting for things other than the major party candidates if it registers somewhere. The system, doesn't like to count those votes because it doesn't want there to be power in it. It fears that those who are angry and disaffected will actually rise up against the system and insist on something better. And so what it does is it falsely convinces us that we have no power. The only thing we can do is choose between evils. And if we choose to do anything else, that's because we're naive children who have decided to waste our vote. It's nonsense. It's not a waste of a vote. It's a very powerful thing. Now, personally, I think of myself at the point, what do I know? I've already lost this election. I know that my candidate won't win because my candidate is not running. It's not on the ballot, right? So I've already lost this one. Does that mean there's nothing to be done? No. I'm voting in the next election, right? I'm voting in 2020 in the next election by registering the fact that I don't accept this lesser evil garbage.
I don't know what that means. I'm voting in 2020 in the next election. I don't know what that sentence means.
It means that by voting against the duopoly, one registers that there is a massive political movement waiting to be spoken to, and that signal is power. It is not power to change things in 2020, but it is power to change things in the future. So if you think about elections, we are basically convinced to think of elections in isolation, right? But it is obviously an iterated game. And if this, if you were to analyze them, if you were an alien coming to Earth to analyze our elections, you wouldn't sit down and think of them as one-off puzzles. You would think of them as iterated. And that affects the game theory. So think of elections as iterated, and it changes what you ought to do.
No, and that's actually part of the lesser of two evils argument, is it assumes that you're always an end game. It assumes that you're always an end game. If you don't do it now, everything will end.
Absolutely.
Actually, the next question, the final question from episode 48, is related to that last one. Why does being demanded to vote by celebrities and the media feel like propaganda? I've always had a strange feeling about I voted stickers and comments like, if you don't vote, you can't complain. So I feel like you kind of touched on this, but pick up a little bit more.
Well, I would add one thing. I do think you should vote so that it is not ambiguous as to whether you are apathetic or disaffected. If you are disaffected, you want to register as disaffected and not as a non-participant, right? And the way to do that is to vote so it's clear you're willing to spend the effort, and frankly, it's not a huge effort, right? But you want to register as willing to spend the effort and not up for this bullshit, right? That's the powerful move. And so I do think if you didn't do that, it makes it ambiguous as to whether or not you have a right to complain because you might be apathetic. And if you're apathetic or lazy, then the point is actually it does reduce your right to complain. So I sort of believe it. Now, celebrities, unfortunately, this is just an evolutionary.
It is propaganda.
It is propaganda, and it's a novelty problem. The fact that because we are exposed to celebrities and we recognize them, it sort of feels like they're people in our little town, and they're not. Right. So anyway.
My good friend, the person I'll never meet, tells me I need to vote. Okay. So
right.
Vote.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Okay. Next question from the Discord server this week. So people on the Discord server vote, pose questions, as I understand it, and then vote on which one they want us to address each week. What would be the best steps towards returning the K12 program to a functional level of employment readiness in graduates? Is there a way we can reduce the perceived necessity of higher education and have completeness be restored to a high school diploma? Teaching towards higher education seems off the mark. I agree. Teaching towards higher ed seems off the mark, and there's the school that we met at in high school, and as like many other elite private schools are called college preparatory, right? And that is clearly what it is that they are doing, and yet actually, the school where we met did far more than that, and I would say that it did not. It also did not make the mistake of what I think is intrinsic to this question, which is employment readiness. This is the thing that we hear from most people who are saying, look, the liberal arts have gone off the rails. That's not what we need. We need to know what it is. We need to train people to be ready to enter the workforce and be employable. And that was more true 20, 50, and 100 years ago than it is now. And even when it was more true because the future then was more predictable and looked more like the immediate past, it was still not the highest and best goal of education. The highest and best goal of education should be helping people realize their full potential so they can live as maximally productive, however you define that, and creative and content citizens of the society in which they were born. And so that liberal arts goal, which is explicitly not about training, it's about thinking, can live side by side, can exist side by side with the more sort of trades-oriented goals of training. The additional problem with the training goal right now is we don't know what the future looks like. We don't know what employment looks like. We don't know what jobs are going to look like. And so the idea that especially current educators are going to be able to train kids for tomorrow's jobs is laughable, I would say.
Yeah, it's laughable. On the other hand, I don't think today's educators are well positioned to do either job.
No, they're not.
And that's a tragedy. So I do think that there's something that haunts this discussion, which is that the choice, we've got a dichotomy, which is false because there's another thing that we could teach for.
Mm-hmm.
So in other words, there's this, maybe overly simplistic or idealistic idea of, empowering you to see the full glory of the human experience, right? Mm-hmm. The liberal arts thing, which, if you're in a position to take advantage of it, is a great thing if it's done well, mm-hmm. which it generally isn't.
And it won't be everyone's cup of tea, or nor will everyone be in a position to feel like they can afford to spend time there.
Well,
even.
I think if it was done well, it would be everybody's cup of tea, because what it would really be doing is giving you the higher order tools in order to figure out what the specific.
We're going to solve puzzles. We're going to play games. Right. We're going to engage in sport with an academic bent.
Right. If what it did was make you really smart and aware and motivated, self-motivated, such that you could do what you set your mind to, right? Then the point is, that's everybody's cup of tea if you can do it. And in general, we don't think we can do it because by the time students get to a place where it might be done, they're too damaged in general for it to be done, and the teachers just aren't in a position to deliver it, less and less so in some sense.
Yeah, less and less so in part because teaching now, like policing, has become less and less of a vaunted profession, and so people going into it are less likely to be sort of the best at what they do. That said, there are many, many, many awesome teachers out there who are just hamstrung.
Yes.
This is the bigger problem, I think, than that that there are no teachers who can do the job. No, there are plenty of teachers who can do the job, but they're being prevented from doing the job precisely because, in part, the teaching towards the test, the number of days, the number of hours in any given school year that are devoted to test prep or test taking. And what's the test for? The test is about college prep. So, that doesn't serve, actually, I think, anyone. If those teachers were allowed to actually teach, and if the good teachers were allowed some freedom to actually do what they could do, then we might have a better educational system.
I know I'm not really disagreeing with you, but I do disagree that there are lots of good teachers. And in part, there aren't lots of good teachers because the system doesn't provide enough freedom. If you're a good teacher, that means that you have effectively been armed with this mindset, and then you are going to absolutely bridle against the requirements that are put in your way. And so the point is, by massively underpaying so that we don't reward those who might have a passion for it, and then hamstringing teachers, basically what we've done is we've driven the talent out. And that's not to say that there are no good teachers left. There are, but it is the exception, not the rule, because it's people who have to have all of these immunities and ability to see past these stupid structures in order to do anything that feels reasonable. And I think, frankly, it's getting harder and harder. So
yeah, no, it is getting harder and harder. And I would say, it's not just the money. It's easy to say, and I believe it to be true. And in fact, I said the same thing as well, that we don't pay teachers enough, and that makes it harder to attract the best and the brightest. That said, back when we were at Evergreen, and I was the faculty representative for the Council of Faculty Representatives in Washington State for 1 year, which is to say Evergreen and the other, 5 4-year public schools in the state of Washington all met once a month on one of the campuses, and then during the ledge session, we would go and speak the needs of higher ed to the state. At least that was the idea. It didn't really work out that way. But at one point early on, we ended up with basically pay sheets, and there were representatives from University of Washington and Washington State University, the 2 PhD granting institutions in the state of Washington that are public, as opposed to Western, Central, Eastern, and Evergreen, which are master's level institutions, I think, still. And the pay for faculty at UW and at Washington State, and indeed at the other 3, was all sort of as you expect for faculty. And they somehow were complaining. There was legitimate complaint about how low high school teachers' pay was, because the idea was that if we get the pipeline better, we'd be getting better college students in. And when I looked at these numbers of what high school teachers were being paid in most parts of the state, they were higher than what Evergreen faculty were being paid. So, Evergreen was famously terrible at paying its faculty, right? And this was after our pay had climbed a little bit, but was still just quite low. And yet, what we used to say, and I think you innovated this, was we got paid in freedom. So yeah, we made plenty and it was cheap to live in Olympia. So, we made plenty to live nicely, but you couldn't really move anywhere else on that pay, on either of the coasts, and buy a house, with the kind of money that we were making for most of the time that we were there. What we had making less than most high school teachers in the state, that they didn't have almost any of, was the freedom to make the decisions, to think about what we wanted to, teach what we wanted to, take students where we wanted to, all of these things. And increasingly, the public K-12 system gives basically no freedom at all to its teachers. So I don't know how you could even tell if how many good teachers there are left in the system at this point. And I can say, we can speak for hours about what we actually think about the faculty at Evergreen, and we've made snide comments in the past, and that's not what we're going to do here now, because we really know, because there was so much freedom that people revealed themselves with what they did and mostly did not do. But how would you even tell with regard to the teachers, given how constrained they are by all of the especially testing protocols that are being handed them?
Well, I mean, there's a sort of stands to reason criteria. If the job pays like crap and you have a passion for it, but you're unable to deploy that passion because of all of the rules, you go do something else.
Yeah,
I also
that's
think
true.
that just sort of matches the experience. And we do meet occasionally these subversive teachers who are figuring out how to teach in spite of the rules, right?
In the public schools.
Yeah, in the public schools. But I think the answer is just evident. So one last thing I want to say is, The problem is, as soon as you get away from a pure liberal arts bent, the idea is, oh, you're teaching for employers, right? You're teaching to what the employers want. There is another category, right? We could arm you to be good at stuff, to be good at thinking, to be good at problem solving, which means, hey, you might become an employer. We're not trying to please employers. We're trying to make employers. So,
well, and this is what you and I used to talk about and teach about, actually, and present to Evergreen people when they would listen, when we were still there, was we need a reframing of the liberal arts that does not simply inherit the readings and the philosophies of 100 years ago, but actually imagines what it would be like to be an informed and self-sufficient citizen of the 21st century.
Yeah. And I would add, self-motivated.
Yes.
We do the worst possible job on this front, and it means that everybody is waiting for somebody to tell them what to do, and it's a disaster, predictably.
Absolutely.
We have to figure out how to build self-motivated problem-solving people, which frankly will be happier, more effective, more economically productive people too.
Absolutely.
So, hey, let's do that.
Let's do that. Let's do it. All right, let's move on to questions from the last hour. I tried to get my MSNBC addled parents to watch Dark Horse. It was too big a shock to the system. Do you have any suggestions for introducing folks to life outside the cable news paradigm in a non-threatening way?
Well, have you tried restraints of some kind so that they don't really have a choice? I don't know. That's a terrible answer.
It's a terrible answer.
Yeah, it's a terrible answer. No, you know the people you're trying to persuade, and the problem is,
well, but can we think of any texts, movies, if this is too much for them?
Yeah.
It might be that a clip or two from us, but I think if this is too much for them, certainly Tim Pool is, and Sam Harris might not be, right? Like he's.
Well, I mean, I'm gonna go hard line on this.
Do it.
I think the answer is, you're talking about your people and figuring out how to get your people to wake up to the fact that certain stuff that they have become convinced of is nonsense, and that it is serving to keep them imprisoned in a extractive paradigm that is parasitizing them. I don't know how you do it. I don't even know if your people can be saved, but if they can, then the point is there's a game, which is, how do you reach somebody who's difficult to reach? What's the thing that will cause them to think twice about something they thought they had nailed? And I'm always interested to hear what works, but in some sense, it's very individual.
Yeah, I mean, it is. I feel like, I don't think you're trying to evade the question, but I think you are. And I'm trying not to evade the question, and I can't think of what there might be. So, I'm thinking, some of the readings that I have read from here, Solzhenitsyn, Joseph Heller, Václav Havel, obviously Orwell and Aldous Huxley, are so prescient and so relevant, and yet I don't know that they will seem so to someone who is not yet framing what MSNBC and CNN and WAPO and the New York Times are feeding us as prescient, as relevant right now. So, all
right, I take back my answer.
Okay, you don't have to take it back.
I'm
looking for some additional text. I mean, I get one thing is, not all of them, but Megan Daum has a new podcast, Blocked and Reported, and it's across the board.
No, that's
no, I'm sorry. It's called The Unspeakable Podcast. Blocked and Reported is Katie and Jesse, which I wouldn't recommend in this case. I don't think that's the right thing. But Megan Daum's podcast is new, and not all of them would be relevant here. But she's got an interview, for instance, with a psychologist who specifically works on with and on police, and she's got one on with a psychologist, actually, again, who's thought a lot about the rising rates of trans in teenagers, and oh boy, and just a number of them. And she is so thoughtful and careful, and I say this with tremendous respect, but like easy to listen to. She's I think she has a good chance of maybe not being threatening to people who I guess are threatened by us or just can't hear what we're doing. Maybe.
Yeah, I'm going to argue John McWhorter.
Yeah.
Jonathan Haidt.
Yeah, but he doesn't. I mean, he's not. What of Jonathan Haidt's?
Well, I don't know. I mean, he's certainly done plenty of stuff that you can find on YouTube. Let's see.
But I mean, The Coddling of the American Mind, Haidt and Lukyanov's book from 2 years ago.
And The Righteous Mind. I think that would be, anything that...
Again, that though, The Righteous Mind is sort of modern context free, just like Solzhenitsyn and and Heller and Havel. So it's not about this particular moment. And I suspect that many people need some some of the context of the particular moment to begin to crack the facade that presumably MSNBC is providing.
Yeah, but if you, let's say, you read Righteous Mind and then you look at what Haidt is doing in the context of this modern stuff, right? It's very hard to dismiss him, right? He's very, very careful, very well grounded, and I think quite hearable. And so, it unfortunately, it may be too much homework.
Yeah, it's a lot of work.
But anyway, I think it's at least potentially a way in.
What's next? Do you guys think that it is possible that the pre-existing medical conditions hit hardest by COVID are because the tissue that was used in the gain-of-function research was tissue from humans with these conditions?
That's an interesting question. I think it is well within the realm of possibility that we have to think carefully about what the features are of the disease that would have come from these serial passage experiments and what tissues they may have been run in or what creatures they may have been run in, and it may have been both. So whether these pre-existing conditions, we've talked a little bit about, if you had tumor tissue, for example, that tumors are very poorly epigenetically regulated, and that could be causing the very eclectic nature of this disease, that it invades lots of different kinds of tissue. So something like that is possible. Whether the individuals had the very particular pre-existing conditions, I would say it is more likely that you've got an unregulated tissue or a poorly regulated tissue that therefore simulates some of those conditions rather than that the patient that the tissue came from had them.
Yeah, I would tend to agree, and I just don't have a good enough sense of how the gain-of-function research is run to have a lot of insight here. But my sense, if the lab origin hypothesis is true and it was gain-of-function research that was happening in Chinese labs, then to my mind, one of the places I go to when I see this question as well, one of the main pre-existing medical conditions that seems to be correlated with bad outcomes in COVID is obesity. And my sense is that there is far less obesity in the Chinese population than, for instance, in Western in populations in the West. And why? Yeah.
Well, I'm struggling to think whether there's any reason to think that they would have used tissue from Chinese people.
Well, that's why it's like, it's in Chinese labs. So where are they getting? Oh, this is just some international source of tissue.
My guess would be that because, for valid reasons, because you want work to be comparable between labs, that probably there's some
equivalent of the JAX lab for human tissue.
Right, which could be a vulnerability just as the JAX lab is a vulnerability, but I don't know.
Yep.
Could also be, yes, it is possible either way. And I'm sure that people who are deeply ensconced in this kind of work know the answer off the top of their head, but I don't.
Bret claims a great amount of liberal pushback to critical race theory. He then names 9 liberal public intellectuals out of 3,000. I can think of 30 total in the real world, and I am a socialist. is this in-group bias clouding?
I don't get, I mean, I know what the question means, but
Right.
I don't get it. It feels to me like, another version of, mostly peaceful protest, right? So if you have 9, I mean, and it's not like the list stopped at 9. 9 was the ones that I found that had a direct connection to the Wall Street Journal opinion page.
Well, I guess to steelman both this question and actually that Wall Street Journal article by, was Jason Riley? Is that who we decided wrote it? The public intellectuals, I think, are far quieter and therefore basically misrepresent what the rest of the people on, among the liberals who aren't given voice because they don't have pieces in, on op-eds pages of papers are actually thinking. So, you and me being certain that there is a tremendous number of people, that it is the silent majority of people on the left who actually are looking askance at this and, maybe going along because it doesn't feel that dangerous, or actually beginning to get really antsy about it, that it's a really large number of people, is not the same thing as arguing that it is a large number of public voices on the left. And it's not a large number of public voices on the left, and it's certainly not a large enough number of public voices on the left who are criticizing this. On the other hand, so what we did say when we were talking about this last hour was, in part, when you do start talking about it, you get told you're not on the left, and you get told to shut up, and you lose your platform, and you all of these things that people say about cancel culture and such are true, and so that it is exactly pushing people into silence when they might not otherwise be silent.
Yeah. So I want to be a little bit careful. I don't think that it's a majority that are just keeping their mouth shut. I think people start out knowing better, and then they take a step on the slippery slope, and then they convince themselves of this woke nonsense out of an instinct to self-preservation.
I don't know what those numbers look like. I hope it's still a majority.
But I want to be really sure that the pushback here is clean, because there was something very bizarre about that opinion piece. Okay. It literally said, you and I found the same quote, and we didn't talk about it. Okay.
Yeah.
Right. Where are the liberal voices pushing back? We find conservatives pushing back. Where are the liberals? Right. This was written by somebody in the Wall Street Journal, where somebody at the Wall Street Journal editorial page could have said, well, there are some. In fact, here are several articles that we've published
on our page, exactly the same page that you're publishing this. So that was your group. That was your list of 9. Was
right.
Just
and it
off
wasn't
the top
that
of your
they
head.
weren't all published there, but they were all published or mentioned, or clearly the page would be aware of them. So I would have expected, if the author had been just somehow unaware, then I would have expected the page in the editorial process to say, actually, it's not that bleak. Right? Which would have then resulted in a change in that sentence, which didn't happen somehow. But even weirder, Jason Riley, the author, follows all of us. I believe it was every single person I mentioned is in his list of people that he follows on Twitter, and not newly so. It's not like he just became aware of us, right? This goes back what must be years following us. So how can somebody who is aware of all of us and knows full well, that we keep saying we're liberals, this doesn't track for us, how could such a person write that sentence, and then how could the page sign off on it? It's just,
well, it might, maybe we're reading it wrong. Maybe the intention is to push people to speak up and say, no, here we are, for God's sake, we understand that this is a problem. There are a lot of ways to get people to act that are legitimate but not straightforward.
Yeah, but this is a newspaper, and it's the Wall Street Journal, and it's the Wall Street Journal, which was far-sighted enough to actually let us write for them and not to, sanitize what we wrote so it looked like it came from conservatives. So anyway, something odd happened. I don't think we're ever going to know what it is, but something odd happened and it shouldn't have happened, because at the very least, if you're going to make the claim there aren't enough liberals standing up against this, which is a fine claim, then the answer is there are some, but why aren't there more like these folks? And then it raises a question. Well, what has your experience been?
Yeah.
Experiences, I keep getting portrayed as a conservative, right?
Yeah.
Like, so, anyway, something else should have happened.
Yep. Next question. I think the mostly peaceful argument surrounding riots has been debunked. Why does this not work as an argument for the anti-racists, replacing it with society being mostly non-racist?
Yeah. So first, go ahead.
Well, no, in part because the mostly peaceful stuff was sort of, it started to be in the water. Like, it was all of these media platforms who were making this claim, and it depends on what you mean by mostly. It depends on what you mean by peaceful. And they all had these different definitions, all of which were bullshit, but they were all defending it through these sort of, anything ranging from dim-witted to nefarious means, I would say. And compare that to anti-racism is a very specific ideology created by a very specific person, Ibram X. Kendi, and it has a very precise definition, which is bullshit. But it's not this amorphous thing. So, people who are saying, well, I'm not anti-racist, well, then you're racist. Kendi says so. And people don't respond to that by saying, Kendi says so. They may not even know that. But the fact is, it does have this thing at base, which is crazy. It's crackpot. It's nasty. It's divisive. It's racist. All of those things. But it is a real thing at base that is, yes, the creation of the fever dream of Ibram X. Kendi. But boy, he's winning with it. And it does mean that there's something that you can go back to and point to.
Yeah. I mean, I think in part there's enough complexity surrounding racism and enough amorphousness that it doesn't track as cleanly. And we're not going to know what role we played in breaking free of that, mostly peaceful nonsense. But before the mostly peaceful argument broke into 1,000 pieces, we did a little riff where we were talking about my back of the envelope calculations, in which the presidential motorcade in Dallas in 1963 was, above 99% peaceful.
Yeah.
And so anyway,
it was the peacefulest.
So the point is, there's a way to use this mostly peaceful stuff to reveal that it means nothing, right? What isn't mostly peaceful?
Yeah.
Right?
Well, and I guess also, it also doesn't, if you yourself have not engaged in the protests at all, it's easy. And if you've only engaged in the actual peaceful protests, like during daylight, I don't really know what it looks like in the other cities, but in Portland, if it's during daytime, they've been actually peaceful. And there are real legitimate protesters out there. You can just say, without any worry that anyone is going to accuse you of having been not peaceful, accuse you of having been violent. Like, no, that wasn't me. I'm not. Like, I know that I participated in a peaceful protest, right? Whereas the threat of being accused of being racist has become, I'm not the first person to say this, but it's like being accused of being a child abuser. Like, it's this thing. Like, oh, no, I'm not. Oh my God, I'll do anything at all to avoid being called that. And so it is much more easily weaponized, in part because of the fear of being called it, and that works in part because it is a personal accusation rather than a society-level accusation.
Yeah, I think that's a good point.
Next question. We know that two parents are better than one parent, but does the sex of the parents matter? Does having both a mother and father matter? Is there data on kids with same-sex versus hetero parents? Is this an uncomfortable truth? It's a really good question. It's a really good set of questions. I don't know I'm sure there are data on kids with same-sex versus different sex parents, and I don't know what those data are. But we have said, and we've in fact written into the book that we're writing, that if you don't have both sexes of parents in your household, that you should work harder to make sure that your children are exposed to trusted adults of the sex that is not represented in your household. It doesn't need to be a parent, but it needs to be someone who's close enough that they can actually do some of the jobs of parenting and modeled behavior of a representative of that sex for your children, so that they have trustworthy models growing up.
Yep. I would say there's reason to wonder about this, that there are kinds of wisdom and skill sets that have traveled the female line. There a corresponding set or an inverse set that have traveled the male line. They need to get there somehow, right? You want the full set of skills. There's a question about,
But it's not just the skills either. It's just like, it's role modeling, right? And no matter how awesome a role model I am for our two children, they're boys. And I don't want them looking up to me and saying, I want to be mom when I grow up.
Right.
I want them to, to learn from me and to develop things and habits that I have, and to also learn from me and not do things and develop habits that I have. But in terms of how it is that they will engage with the world, as much as you and I have shed more of the gender stereotypes than almost anyone else I know, you're their father and they're boys and they're becoming men.
That is comforting to hear.
It is my claim that has been from the beginning. I'm sticking with it.
All right.
I'm the putative father of those two children. Now you are their father, and you are the model to which they should aspire more closely, even though there's very little about what we do that is at all sex
typical.
No, sex mandated.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So that's true. And it's not just the, you're going to grow up to be men, you need to have a model for that. There's also, a model of a relationship. And, assuming you're straight, there's a model of, what is a woman? What is it likely to be like to interact with one? So there's a lot of stuff that needs to be modeled. That said, I think the conversation would be missing something if it didn't recognize the possibility. I mean, within, gay culture, there's a lot of variation around these gender norms, right? And so anyway, I think what I would say is my personal suspicion is that there is not, that having two parents who love you and a world of examples from which to draw is probably way better than
a huge swath of hetero families.
Right.
Yeah.
Or one parent who loves you but is so stretched so thin by virtue of the economic realities of the situation. So, I guess what I would say is, there's probably
but
something.
All else being equal,
there's liable to be something. But the ways we damage kids are so many that, I don't see it as a big factor relative to all, allowing advertisers to access your children and, reschedule how often they're hungry, right? Like that's a massive kind of damage.
You could even argue that since gay couples inherently have family by choice, they never fell into being in a relationship with their parents, with their child's other parent, and therefore ended up with a family before they wanted to. That their greater intentionality may result in greater preparedness and skill.
Yeah,
I don't know that that's true, but I can see an argument in that regard as well.
Yes, if you're gay and in a committed relationship, it's not likely you will accidentally end up with children.
Yeah, I think that's what I just said.
That is.
Yeah. You're at almost 50 minutes. Oh, geez, dude, you didn't tell us. We got to switch to the next one. Okay, let's do one more question here, and then we'll go over into the questions from this hour. This is just a comment. Do point folks to the interview with Zuby. The concepts discussed in an open manner will help many in their understanding of recent events, in my humble opinion. Okay, so I think that I don't know if that's responsive. These aren't in order anymore, so I don't know if that's responsive to that earlier question about what the guy whose parents found DarkHorse too much. But maybe I don't remember enough about what was in the Zuby interview to know if that might work. But maybe parents who are MSNBC addled is the phrase of the person asking the question. Could still hear the Zuby interview.
I don't know if this is a reference to the DarkHorse Zuby interview or the one on Zuby's podcast.
Your interview with Zuby or Zuby's interview with you? Yeah. I don't know.
Don't know.
Okay. Okay. We'll try this now. Okay. Oh, really? Really militant moderate? Some love Pimple-pop videos. Some can't stand them. More adaptive to enjoy or dislike. Might they balance out so we pick just the right amount of zits? I didn't know these existed.
Me either.
No.
You really need a video? You can't figure this one out?
Yeah, I feel like you figure it out. No.
Yeah.
Ugh, gross.
I think you gotta.
Oh boy.
If you're watching a lot of zit popping videos,
Yeah.
I think you need to take a good look at yourself in the mirror and pop your zits that way.
Okay, good.
I don't know.
Thank you for discussing Solzhenitsyn and his Live Not by Lies essay. Have either of you heard about or read Rod Dreher's book, named for the essay and released last month? Thank you for everything. No, I know of him. I did not know that he had written a book named for that essay. Look into it. Zach, would you just highlight that so I can go back to it since it's 15. Hail, professors. To promote more respectful discussion within our society, should we bring back dueling? If there are consenting adults full of hate, should we allow them to engage to defend honor? Pros and cons, please.
Totally.
That's it.
I mean, I don't know. Officially, no. Unofficially, sure.
Consenting adults full of hate. Should we allow them to engage to defend honor?
I really can't say.
Yeah.
Probably not. I take your point, and I find it funny.
Yeah.
But yeah, probably we should not revive dueling. On the other hand, it's not like there aren't some people I wouldn't mind seeing
Dueled?
Yeah, dueled.
Dueled. Right. Duly dueled. Do you believe in hypnosis, or are you trance-phobic?
You think that's directed at me?
No, I think that's directed at both of us. I think it is both a play on words, trance-phobic, and it's a real question.
Trance-phobic. Sorry. It's blurry at that distance. Got it.
So hypnotherapy is real. And the versions of it that are in movies and such are caricatures of what it is. I don't think we have a full understanding of what all it can do. But it is a real and powerful tool among many in the human arsenal that can be used to help modify behavior and change motivational states and alleviate pain as well.
Yes. That said, I am completely immune to it, apparently.
Well, based on that one attempt. So
I'll bet we could try 100 times and it won't work.
Probably. Yeah.
I would also say beware Darren Brown. I know it's very tempting, but my sense is the Darren Brown illusion works, but you are the mark. You in the audience are the mark. Well, he certainly does hypnosis. So anyway, yes, I'm not a believer in Darren Brown.
Okay.
Yeah.
You changed the question.
I did.
Yeah.
But I mean, it's bound to be on people's minds because it's very compelling.
Yeah. It hadn't occurred to me that that's what the question was about. I mean, I barely know who he is. Whereas, as you know, I have an extremely good friend who is both a clinical psychologist and a hypnotherapist, and has had remarkable success working with people whose problems were otherwise seemed intractable.
Yep. No, I do think it is what it is we don't know, but that it is a route into some intermediate state in which there's plasticity, and I mean, she's clearly very good at what she does.
Well, I mean, that's exactly it. But if she was extremely good at what she was, and it was a farce, she still couldn't accomplish what she does.
No. By saying she's extremely good at it, I'm saying it's clearly a real space. Right. She wouldn't be wasting her time on it if it wasn't.
Right.
That said, I don't think you can reach everybody that way because
I don't think you can either. And I will I guess this is pure anecdote, but after the boat accident for now 4.5 years ago in Galapagos, she made me a tape to listen to and just said just lie on the floor and listen to this. It's like, I don't know, 10-12 minutes every day really? For how long? Until you don't anymore. And it, it's not what people have in mind. I wasn't being sent into trance or anything, but the power to use cadence and words and non-linguistic sound that appears to be linguistic to change perception, and I think to change healing rate and trajectory is remarkable. That was my sense. Next up, this is a donation to test the hypothesis by releasing helium from a tank from a balloon store in the garage. Not too much, boom. Side note, so that's
helium.
Yeah.
Not hydrogen.
I said helium.
No, but no boom.
Okay, yes. There wouldn't be a boom because it's helium. I didn't say that. That's in the question.
Correcting the question.
Side note, lots of mask wearing here, greater than 95%, but cases are rising fast. Parentheses, schools. So without knowing where you are or what's going on, I don't know. My suspicion is that as people begin spending more time inside with windows closed, we're going to get cases rising, even if masks are supposedly being worn, because masks are imperfect, and even people who are wearing masks sometimes aren't.
Yes, and in fact, the upgraded model that we talked about a couple live streams ago about aerosolized transmission. The masks don't work if you're in an environment that saturates with these aerosolized particles, because a lot of stuff is going around them, and basically you breathe it long enough, you'll get it. So paying attention to airflow and saturated environments, masks are good for transient exposures. If you walk into a room that's full of COVID, you will reduce the likelihood of contracting it.
Yeah, and big volume spaces are better than small volume spaces. So here's a place where like vaulted ceilings like you find in grocery stores is actually going to make those spaces probably safer if the HVAC is doing anything useful at all.
Yep. As to the first part with the helium, this is the test of the hypothesis. I probably should have mentioned it, would be to get some balloon helium at a party store and bag a camera and put some helium in there and see if we reproduce the same regular drop in signal. I haven't done it for a couple reasons. One is
can't find a party store.
I probably could find a party store. I have one of these phones from the future that tells you where stuff like that is.
Amazing.
I know. But the other thing is it takes time for the helium to diffuse out of the MEMS chip. And so you lose access to your device until the device wakes back up a few days later. And I'm just sort of reluctant to do it. But yes,
we should do it.
I probably should do it.
We should do it.
Yep.
Yeah, we should do this test, and not, doing it in the garage. Might, if that works on a camera, it might make sense to do it in the garage as a next step, just to follow through, but I'm not even sure it's necessary.
I mean, let's put it this way. The prediction is that we will see the same pattern of failure of the cameras with the regular dropped signal. And I would say if that happens, then the answer is it's helium that did it. Where did it come from? Did it come from the smoke, or did it come from the geology in the house being buttoned up? That's the next question.
Yeah. Where can evolutionary principles be applied outside of biology, and where are they commonly applied when they shouldn't be?
Well, I would say you've got a problem that comes from the fact that we group the sciences together as if they're the same thing, right? So we group biology with chemistry and physics. That isn't correct grouping in the sense that they're amenable to scientific investigation, but it is not a correct grouping in the sense that biology has purpose, right? Ultimately, maybe it doesn't, but a biological creature behaves as if it has purpose to increase fitness, right? And the point is, those realms in which there is identifiable purpose and complexity are properly analogized to biology. So that is to say, psychology, engineering, economics. Those are the places where evolutionary dynamics are mirrored. And
anthropology, everything downstream.
Anything made of living critters.
Exactly. All of anything that might be studied in the humanities or social sciences.
Right. On the other hand, something like a hurricane has complexity but no purpose, right? It's an inappropriate application there.
But there's also the question of evolutionary principles. So, selection might be understood as an evolutionary principle, and adaptation might be understood as an evolutionary principle. And selection, as you have very frequently laid out, selection can exist with tidal action on a beach, arranging rocks in a particular order by size, and there's there's nothing biotic there. It's certainly not biology, but that is selection in action. There's no adaptation there.
Yeah.
So adaptation is the thing that is going to exist only at the biotic
biological realms. That's exactly the right distinction. And the fact that we subsume selection into biology space is wrong. So
right, exactly.
Hence where Lee Smolin is in terms of using principles for the universe. Basically, these are principles that are upstream of biology. Okay, so
where are they commonly applied when they shouldn't be? I don't think that category exists, but they are often commonly applied badly, or non-evolutionary thinking, which is cloaked in I'm evolutionary now, is applied in places where it shouldn't be, and hence we get things like social Darwinism and eugenics and all sorts of other really batshit crazy thinking that rides around looking like evolution, but it's not.
Yeah. Now, where is it absolutely necessary? Medicine, psychology, dentistry, ophthalmology, these are places where it is largely absent, and the cost to us is absolutely immense.
Yep. Economics,
it's
already there because game
there.
So evolution and economics sort of co-invented game theory.
Yeah.
Axelrod and Hamilton is right there, like at the sort of origin. Right?
So in fact, in that case, I would say a lot has to go the other way, right? So diminishing returns is invented inside of in economics.
Yeah.
And it's not an economic principle. It's an evolutionary principle
Yeah.
that works in economics. And so you have to actually pull it out to the higher level. Very important that you do.
Yeah. Hi, please respond to social media forces people. Excuse me. Social media forces people who never leave the house to encounter reality in a way they never have, and that scares them. It also allows the same people to exercise power in a way they never have before. True on both fronts, I would say. And I assume that the person writing the question is using the phrase "who never leave the house" with some hyperbole. Almost everyone leaves the house a little bit, but people really do have narrower and narrower scopes of experience, especially this year, especially since March of this year. But increasingly people who, God, the number of people I see evidence of on social media who's, who are fighting the good fight and being woke and saying, I'm a dad and I'm a parent of two and you must be racist. Like, I don't think you've ever been anywhere, have you? Like you actually are afraid of the rest of the world, and you lecturing me about a Eurocentric vision of the world. I don't think you actually know what that would even mean. Like, why don't you actually go somewhere and talk to some people who don't look like you? Maybe even a different language, even if you don't really speak that language, have a beer with them, sit down. You'll be able to communicate a lot, even without much shared language. See what that's like, and then get back to me about how we're all racist. Like, seriously, let's talk after you've gone out and experienced something that's not like everything else you've ever experienced. I think most people haven't done that increasingly. More and more people increasingly haven't managed to be able to do that, get outside of their own sphere.
Yeah, which is less and less incentivized to the extent that you can source little bits of excitement and what feels like exposure.
It feels
online.
like exposure, but it's not, because it's
totally
safe.
Yeah.
Because nothing can reach out and shock you or hurt you or surprise you or make, like, it's totally safe. And therefore it's totally sanitized.
So I think also, though, implicit in the question is, and I must say I'm involved in a private conversation, an ongoing one. I'm not going to out anybody, but there is a conjecture in this conversation about people who are socially uncomfortable and maybe not especially well skilled playing a larger and larger role in our online interactions with each other.
Yes.
And that basically that sensitivity is manifesting in dysfunctional ways, that we're sort of all becoming dysfunctional in the context of these rules that can't possibly be adhered to and things like this. So I do think there's something to it.
Yeah, no, I think absolutely that's true.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's not just that we're all being made worse, but that what's driving it is some subset of people who started out more dysfunctional than most of us.
Yeah.
Yeah. Good afternoon to you both. What do you imagine is the evolutionary explanation for fainting goats? I own 4 of them and can't quite figure out how they survived without human intervention. Thoughts? I never quite remember what the story is on fainting goats. This is one of these things that it enters my head briefly, and there's something that seems so amorphous or not quite real about it to me that I don't remember what the story is.
Yeah,
you got it?
No, I'm in more or less
okay?
the same boat. I
Yeah,
think
so
they
we
are.
don't know.
I think they are domestic goats. Which,
So they've been created by humans,
right? Which
basically
means somebody
we've selected for fainting
probably,
somehow.
Well, we selected for something, and fainting came
That's
along
why I
with
said
it.
somehow. Yeah,
Yeah.
we selected for something that was associated with fainting, or maybe some Yahoo decided to actually select for fainting. Who knows?
Well, it could be. You could imagine that a goat. Obviously we don't raise goats for wool, but let's just say that you had an animal like that. You could select for sudden passivity,
Yeah.
right? So I don't know that. Wow.
Yeah.
I'm not saying I know what we're doing with
fainting is sudden passivity. I just hadn't framed it that way in my
sudden catastrophic passivity, right?
Yes.
I've never actually suffered sudden catastrophic
I've
passivity,
certainly
but I have
never
felt
known
like
you to
it
do so.
occasionally.
Yeah. We'll get you the goat salts.
Right. But yeah. So anyway, there could be something, to select for that would directly reward that. There could be something where you select for something that carries it along as a byproduct. But unless it's wild goats, then the question doesn't really exist. On the other hand, right? Possums play possum.
Right,
Why?
Yep.
Because it causes animals that are reluctant to eat already dead prey to mess with them. So,
and they do smell. Actually, it's interesting. When you just said that, it occurred to me. The possums, who are the organisms that play dead as a way of not getting eaten, come pre-smelled.
They're smelly.
So it's a more compelling behavioral defense than it would be if they smelled fresh.
And also, goats smell. Goats and everything associated with goats smell.
What do they smell like? Goats.
There's a kind of a goaty smell that is you can detect it in some goat cheese, goat milk, goat meat.
So are you proposing that maybe they're playing dead?
I am saying that is a hypothesis here that makes predictions. I'm not saying I believe that's the case, but I believe it's if it turns out that wild goats faint ever, then that would be the next place I would go.
Sure. I don't know what's going on behind our curtain here, but someone is definitely not playing dead.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Something like that.
Yeah. Okay. Let's get a couple more of these in here. This is going to be a recommendation of something to look at. Jerry Pornell, PhD's Better Political Access.
Is that an alternative to the political compass?
I guess. So I can't quite. It's hard for me to. I can't do it here because it's in Drive and it's not working. We'll take a look. Okay. Is the legalization of human vices like gambling, prostitution, and drugs of net benefit to society as a safe outlet or of net detriment? Well, that's a small question, isn't it? I don't have the same answer to all of those.
Yeah, I agree.
Things,
It's different depending upon which one.
Yeah, so it's not just human vices, but gambling, prostitution, drugs, and then within drugs, and even gambling has multiple things. Like I feel differently about making it really easy for people to waste their money on computerized slots in gas stations than the prospect of betting on the outcomes of races, for instance.
Yep.
There's much more at stake. You just have more skin in the game, and there's more of a narrative structure. There's more of a community possible.
Well, there might even be something real. I mean, being able to interpret which horse is likely to win under what conditions.
There might be some
what
skill.
Fields. Right.
Yeah.
So it's at least in principle not empty the way a slot, or even worse, a computerized slot would be.
Yeah.
And
again, poker's real.
Yeah,
right?
Cards is even more real.
Very real.
There's the underlying card game, and then there's also the human dynamic
reading
of,
the people,
who's bluffing. So that could have value in it. The question poses it as an outlet. Now, I've wondered about this with respect to prostitution. Mm-hmm. And on the one hand, you would imagine that prostitution probably reduces the amount of rape in the world
It might.
because there's likely, an outlet.
Yeah.
On the other hand, prostitutes are very vulnerable, so it channels some of that violence onto a vulnerable population.
Yeah.
But
And
there's
then
also
that whole conversation is so damaged right now by the so-called sex positivity movement,
right.
which wants us to celebrate all outlets of sexuality at all times and simply say that sex workers are doing, admirable and amazing work. It's like, no, you can simultaneously say that some forms of prostitution probably should be legal for the safety of prostitutes, frankly, and also simultaneously be trying to absolutely minimize 100% minimize sex work in the world.
Yep. But I would also add, there is a question about what the effect on relationships is.
Yeah.
In other words, to the extent that the normal situation basically uses sex as an incentive to maintain, good relations with somebody, to the extent that people have an economic outlet to free them, it may be very bad for relationships. And so,
Absolutely.
Anyway, it's certainly an interesting question. I think you would want systematic study of what the consequences is, and in similar situations that have different rules about these things.
And then, with regard to drugs, it's just, drugs isn't a thing, right? We've got some legal drugs already. And we've got a lot of drugs that are not legal. And this is a longer conversation. But, at one level, at first, very broad brush pass, the drugs that have been synthesized and enhanced and concentrated in lab and then are taken in high concentration form into the body are likely to be the ones that are most dangerous and should most 100% be kept away from almost anyone, knowing that they're out there in the world and people are still going to find them.
Yep.
But the question of, say, legalizing hallucinogens, both strong and weak, versus cocaine, are really, those conversations should be happening in different places.
Well, and cocaine versus coca, and heroin versus opium.
Yep.
Right? These are very different questions. So it's the concentration that makes these things lethal.
Yep.
And that is not necessarily the molecule itself.
Yeah. What are you planning to do when you go in the voting booth? Hearing your interviewer describe a vote for Orange Man as a stay of execution felt apt. Your interviewer.
Try and remember who this would be.
I don't know.
Was it Zuby?
No say.
Don't know.
Okay. Anyway, doesn't matter.
Yeah.
I won't be voting for Trump or Biden.
Yeah. I'm voting in the next
I will
election.
Vote. I will vote. I have voted in every single presidential election. I think I might have missed a midterm or two, but I voted every time. I voted third party once before, and I didn't last time, and I regret it.
Yep.
I voted for 2 Clintons. I did not vote for Bill in '96. I voted Green because I couldn't stand him already. But I did vote for Hillary last time, and I resent it. I regret it. And I won't vote for either of the parties this time.
Most important vote I ever cast was for Bernie Sanders in the general election of 2016, which at the time seemed pointless, and it turned out to be really important. So anyway, I think the necessity of ridding ourselves with the system that keeps giving us unacceptable choices is so great that as much as I understand the arguments against doing it, it's the only path.
Yeah. The cat is blocking my screen.
Oh, is he? All right.
There we go. Do you concede to the possibility of you being unable to honestly look into and talk about conspiracy theories, either due to lifelong mainstream media conditioning or out of fear for your reputation? Are there any conspiracies you believe? JFK? 9/11? So the beginning, do you concede to the possibility of you being unable to honestly look into and talk about? Look into and talk about are different, right? I think that's the key thing. Well, look into and talk about are different, and lifelong mainstream media conditioning, or out of fear for your reputation are two different possible reasons. So we've talked about between ourselves an awful lot of things, much of which we have not yet shared publicly, some of which we may never. Why?
Well,
why don't we? Why don't we talk about everything that we? Why don't we talk publicly about everything that we talk about privately?
I think the question reveals the problem, right? As soon as you say conspiracy theory, my sense is you fucked up, right? Not conspiracy theory. Conspiracy theory, if we use the term theory consistently, means a hypothesis of conspiracy that has withstood test, right? It is a proven conspiracy. So conspiracy hypothesis, I believe we are in a better position to talk about that than most people because there is discipline to be had surrounding the underlying logic. The philosophy of science that goes into knowing what did and did not take place involves advancing hypotheses, predictions that would tell you if they were true, and then testing them. So anyway, I feel at liberty to talk in the context of conspiracy hypotheses. I feel jeopardized by the fact that if we talk about a conspiracy hypothesis, there is this eagerness to immediately say, you're advancing conspiracy theories. And it's like, no, I said hypothesis for a reason, right? So if the world would be better at recognizing the distinction between somebody who is talking in the context of hypothesis, where we know what it is that will validate or discount any particular instance, then fine. Then we can have great conversations. If we're going to talk as if people who entertain conspiracy hypotheses are conspiracy theorists, well then, now you've got a trap. It's a Kafka trap, and I don't want to play that game. So anyway, let's do it properly.
Okay, let's do it properly. Let's just get drill down a little bit more on the idea that has lifelong mainstream media conditioning made it impossible for us to even consider some possible avenues here. I don't actually think so because, well, because I know the extent of the things that we have looked into and considered and talked about.
Right, and you should be too.
And many of which still wonder, there's just the jury is out on a lot of these ideas, and it's not worth talking about some of them publicly yet, maybe ever, but there's a lot of batshit sounding ideas that may not actually be untrue.
Well, but glorious thing about using hypothesis for its intended use is the fact that one advances a hypothesis that involves a conspiracy doesn't mean that you necessarily think it even happened.
Right.
It just means you're saying, here's something that might explain X, Y, or Z, and here's how you would know.
Yep. Seconding a motion to have Dr. Stephen Porges, I'm not sure, on to discuss polyvagal theory. It's pertinent to our times and based in evolutionary biology. Lots of love. I've heard of polyvagal theory. I can't place it at the moment.
Yes, I think I may have promised to look it up and then didn't.
Okay.
So
Zach,
I re-promised looking it up.
Would you highlight what I've got highlighted there, if that makes sense? I don't know how to answer this next one. What is your longest standing disagreement?
Our longest standing disagreement?
Yeah.
What is our longest standing disagreement?
I don't know. I mean, at one level, this is the kind of question like, what's your favorite movie what's your favorite movie wouldn't be a good question, but what are your top 10 pieces of media that you've enjoyed? Being asked that question, I have a memory break. So it's possible I'll come up with something here, but I'm not sure. I'm not sure exactly it's framed this way.
I'm not even sure. Maybe that, 20 minutes after we're done here, it's going to dawn on one of us. But I think in some sense, the nature of the relationship is such that, a disagreement is either trivial and therefore not likely to be long-standing in the sense that it's not going to be a topic that keeps recurring.
We might not resolve it, but we move on.
Right.
Yeah.
Or it's something that's going to take work to figure out what we actually do believe. And, there have been plenty of places where I have thought something, you have thought something inconsistent with it. And I know in retrospect, you were right. There are others where I was right.
Yep.
And I think the point is maybe it's even evidence of something being off if you do have lots of long-standing disagreements that is it a kind of baggage that accumulates in a relationship? And so in effect, what you want to do is put in the work to actually figure out who's right, or if it's not either one of you, then what is it that you haven't figured out about, what explains some discontinuity?
Well, and there can be, I guess there are a number of ways that one can understand the word disagreement, right? So no two humans are totally compatible with one another.
I found it.
Okay, hold on though.
Yeah.
We will, two humans living closely for decades will drive each other crazy in some ways, no matter what. And those things that will be persistent could be understood to be a disagreement, but more to the point, I think it would be a sort of every now and again, like, okay, I'm going to check in, be like, all right, this thing that we already know we aren't totally simpatico on is driving me crazy at the moment. And that's where I am. And that's like, you need to know that that's in my head at the moment. So that's not, I'm not thinking of any particular examples, but we could come up with those. There aren't any that are, years old, I don't think, or, certainly not decades old. But there's certainly like, repeated types of things, just because we are at some level, the same people that we have been forever. So what did you come up with?
Dark chocolate.
I don't even know which way you think this goes. That I like dark chocolate and you don't.
Yeah.
Okay.
I think that and wow. I have been saying for some time that dark chocolate is objectively inferior, and that there is a way in which it is fetishized.
Well, I feel like I grant that.
But but you do have dark chocolate rather than preferring milk chocolate.
So I buy at the moment, instead of sober October, we're doing sugar-free October. So I'm buying chocolate for the boys to have, and one of our children doesn't like dairy, and so he doesn't like milk chocolate, and so I get dark chocolate for him.
Yep.
Often there are things on offer in the dark chocolate area that I find more interesting than what's available in the milk chocolate. And I think in general, the quality is higher because maybe in part because it has been fetishized, because like if you can afford the slightly higher price point, and if they're going to put dried cherries and almonds into the dark chocolate, it's going to be delicious. And the comparable milk chocolate might be a lower quality chocolate. And so it's really hard to control for the cacao content and the quality simultaneously.
Yeah, I agree. And there are some places where dark chocolate, by virtue of its having been mixed with something else, is maybe the right thing.
Yeah.
But on its own, it seems to me no contest ever. And you found an essay this year that argued this very forcefully, which I thought was beautiful. But
anyway, I can't remember what it was.
Yeah.
Something about maybe it would have been about Halloween candy. Actually, maybe I can find it again now that Halloween is coming up.
Yep.
Okay. Interesting question. Okay, let's do 3 more. The American Solidarity Party: pro-labor, healthcare, environment, family. Low Gini? What's Gini?
It is a measure of economic disparity.
GINI. Is it an acronym?
The Gini coefficient. Yep.
Okay. Oh, the Gini. Yes. Okay. Anti-capital punishment. Not pun. Okay. I'm gonna start over. There's American Solidarity Party: pro-labor, pro-healthcare, pro-environment, pro-family, low Gini coefficient, anti-capital punishment, anti-abortion, I think, anti-interventionist war, social democracy within Catholic social teachings, origin point of political matrix useful beyond the present. I'm not sure what that last sentence means.
I don't know.
I don't know either. Most of that looks good to me. There's one thing on your list that I have a problem with, which is
no access to abortion.
No, and I don't want to say anti-abortion, just like I don't want to say, that would be the pro-life position. But I'm pro-choice, at least for early term. Yep. And evidence throughout the world suggests that women who have access to abortion end up in societies where women have access to early term abortion. Those societies have even just economic measures like higher GDP and higher levels of education of both men and women, lower birth rates, obviously, maybe, and just higher levels of productivity without necessarily just producing more kids. So there are a lot of reasons that I am pro-choice, but otherwise everything on that list seems interesting and relevant. I'm not sure what the final question means. Origin point of political matrix useful beyond the present. Do you know what that means?
I don't.
Yeah. And do you know anything about the American Solidarity Party?
No, I can't say that rings a bell.
Not for me either. I haven't heard of it. Next question. Might humans have a predisposition to mate with those of different ethnicities? It seems mixed race offspring are better looking and more intelligent than average as compared to the polar opposite in breeding.
Let's put it this way.
Yeah.
This is a topic that gets ugly pretty quick. But from the point of view of males looking to reproduce without commitment, then yes, you would expect this for reasons of genetic introgression. So there will be many circumstances in history that reflect this predisposition. It doesn't mean that necessarily the same predisposition will exist in the context of high investment relationships. You would predict a much more complicated pattern for both males and females. It would depend a lot on various costs and benefits, which you could do the analysis. But anyway, topic for another time. It's a good one, but it's not going to be a simple answer.
Yeah, so I'm going to drop down. I just scrolled through. There's actually a lot more questions that we're not going to get to. We'll get to some of them next time. This one, which is similarly fraught but related. Have you read A Natural Theory of Rape by Randy Thornhill and Craig T. Palmer? And do you believe there is some credibility that the act of rape was not about power, but a biological trait for primitive non-alpha males to continue their genes? So the modern feminist trope that we are expected to accept that rape is just about power is clearly wrong. Obviously, where did that even come from? Where could that what would that even mean? Was it a strategy that worked for some? Yes. Is it a reprehensible and disgusting strategy that should be criminalized every place all the time? Yes. Back in the day, I at least skimmed it. That was sort of that book, 90s, I think.
So we knew Randy Thornhill at the time. I will say, when that book came out, every evolutionary biologist working at the time had the same sense that, like, well, this isn't exactly news. Yeah. Obviously, it's an evolutionary strategy, but that this is making a big splash based on taking something that we all understood to be the case and revealing it as if it was provocative. Now, is it a low-ranking male's strategy? That can be. It's not the only context. So anyway, what I would say is
war is another context.
Well, that's the thing. Is this is in large measure how war was paid for until a certain point in history. So anyway, there's lots of stuff, and you will find it more or less described, in the Bible. There are rules, Moses, laws of war describe things that you would have to take to be rape, and setting out rules for them. So anyway, yes, there's a lot here. It's a very ancient strategy. It's definitely evolutionary, but rape is an evolutionary strategy. Laws against rape are an evolutionary strategy, right? This is more complex than we give it credit for. So the problem with that book was the implication of saying rape is an evolutionary strategy suggests that
people jump to naturalistic fallacy. Right. They're like, oh, well, then it's inevitable. Then what can you do about it? Like, you can do a lot about it, and we need to do a lot about it, and we need to stop it. Right.
The fact is, you've got two evolutionary strategies. That doesn't say either one of them is any good, but our values tell us one of them is abhorrent, and that, making it so costly that people don't engage in it is obviously the right thing to do.
Yep. So there's just a couple things about helium here that maybe I'll stop with, and the next time we'll come back around and get a few of the other ones we didn't get to. Too much helium might disable the MEMS chip outright rather than altering the frequency.
I believe that might be possible.
Mhm.
These MEMS, they're very mysterious little objects. Now, my sense is that normal levels of helium that might be encountered diffuse in, cause the object very frequently to be unusable for a period of time as if it is dead, and then it slowly diffuses out and they revive. But could you damage the thing permanently? I believe that is possible, at least in some cases.
Okay, and please do the helium test on camera. On camera recorded, not necessarily live stream, but would be interested to watch. It wouldn't be fast enough, would it?
I don't know. It might be.
Okay.
But what you don't want to do is have a process that's slow and therefore seems to falsify the hypothesis that then later on turns out to be right. So I think it might be that you want to record the entire test, and then if it takes 10 hours to trigger it, the point is, all right, here's the place in the test where we first see the flaw.
Yeah. Well, that's why they said not live stream.
Right. Yes, you got it right.
And I'll just finish with this appreciation comment. Thanks so much for this podcast. I've been starved for true intellectual discussion during this lockdown, and it is just wonderful to hear you both regularly. Thank you, Alex.
Yeah, thank you. That's great.
Yeah, thank you very much. And yeah, we are so grateful for the audience and for the support and for comments like that and the pushback that we get and the support. So if you do want to be involved in conversations like this with other people who are interested in such conversations, join one of our Patreons and join the Discord. Come on to mine to get access to that private Q&A once a month, the last Sunday of every month at 11 a.m. Pacific, and then we leave it up so you can watch anytime. Although that's small enough that we're able to actually engage with the chat a little bit, we have so far been. Join Bret's Patreon at a higher level to join in on those conversations that he has.
Monthly conversations on evolution and on civilization. Very good conversations.
Yep. And what else?
I don't know. Maybe that's it. Like, subscribe, send a clip to somebody that you want to bring into the conversation.
That's right.
All right. We will see you next time. Thanks so much.